Desmond Hale was 42 years old, a facilities and operations manager who had spent his career keeping enormous, complicated buildings running so smoothly that no one ever thought about the man who made it happen. He drove a 10-year-old truck he serviced himself. He wore a department badge clipped to a lanyard worn soft at the edges, because it still did its job. That December evening, at the company holiday party in the atrium of the very tower he managed, his wife arrived on the arm of another man, a regional director 2 floors up, and introduced him to the room as her partner, loud enough for the people near the bar to hear. She smiled at Desmond across the floor the way you smile at the help. The director shook hands and called him the maintenance guy without quite looking at him. Desmond nodded and refilled the man's water glass. Not one person in that atrium knew that the maintenance guy owned the building, the company in it, and the paycheck the director was so proud of. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The atrium had been decorated by a vendor Desmond had approved 3 weeks earlier. String lights along the mezzanine rail, a bar setup where the loading carts usually staged, a quartet near the elevator bank it had retuned that summer. He stood near the service corridor with a glass of water and watched the party fill the space he knew better than anyone alive. He knew which of the lights were on the backup circuit. He knew the exact second the heat would kick over from day mode to evening. He knew the building was holding, the way it always held, because he made sure of it. He felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, something quieter. The feeling of finally being able to stop pretending he hadn't watched this coming for the better part of a year. For 7 years, Desmond had been the kind of man who showed up without being asked. He showed up early to the building and late from it. He showed up for his wife Renata's every plan, every ambition, every late-night idea, and he never once made her feel the weight of what it cost him. He covered the lease on the storefront where she launched her event planning business. He worked weekends so she could take the unpaid networking trips she said would change everything. He fixed, quietly, every problem she brought home, because solving things was the only way he knew to say he loved her. He didn't know it then, but she'd been telling people for months that she'd married beneath her ambitions. She had just been waiting for the director's divorce to finalize before she stopped pretending she hadn't already chosen him. Then, that December party. And everything changed. She had staged it. He noticed that the way he noticed things, quietly, without announcing it, without deciding yet what it meant. She'd had her hair done. She wore a dress he'd never seen, bought for a night she clearly considered a debut. She came in on Garrett Voss's arm. Voss, the regional director 2 floors up, the one who signed memos with a flourish and had no idea who actually signed his. She walked Voss through the room, introducing him, and when she reached the cluster of people who knew Desmond was her husband, she didn't lower her voice. She raised it. "This is Garrett," she said. "My partner. The real chapter." Desmond said nothing. Voss extended a hand, friendly in the way of a man being gracious to a lesser. "You're the maintenance guy, right? Building runs great. Keep it up." He didn't quite finish looking at Desmond before he turned back to the room. "Don't make this awkward, Des," Renata said, smiling. "Everyone here already knows. I deserve a man with a future, not a man with a tool belt." Desmond looked at the two of them for a moment. He noticed Voss's glass was nearly empty. He picked up the pitcher from the service table beside him and refilled it, the same careful way he'd top off a coolant line, and set it back down. "Okay," he said. That was all. One word. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't tell the room what it didn't know. He set the pitcher down, checked his watch out of pure habit, and stepped back toward the service corridor as the party folded around the new couple. Behind him, he heard Renata laugh, light and satisfied, and say something to Voss about how typical it was. How Desmond never had anything to say for himself. He let the corridor door close on the sentence. What Renata had never understood, what she was about to spend the next short while, and then the next several months, failing to understand, was the difference between a man with nothing to say and a man who had decided exactly when and where to say it. 5 years earlier, Desmond had stopped being only the man who kept the building running. It had happened the way the important things in his life always happened, quietly, while everyone else was looking at the obvious. The company that owned the tower, a privately held property and services firm, had been mismanaged into a slow collapse by an owner who treated it like a trophy and never read a maintenance report in his life. Desmond understood the building and the business inside it better than any executive because he'd spent 2 decades in its bones, finding the place where things broke before they broke. When a small private group assembled to buy the failing parent company and rebuild it from the ground up, they needed someone who actually knew how it all held together. Desmond put in his savings, then his pension buyout, then everything he'd quietly set aside over 20 years of living far below his means. He took equity instead of a title, because a title was a thing people could see, and equity was a thing they couldn't. He never told Renata the scale of it. She knew he'd put money into something at work. She'd called it his hobby once and never asked again. Because the details bored her, he let her stay bored. By that December, the rebuilt firm owned the tower, the management company, and a portfolio of commercial properties across the region. Desmond held the controlling interest. He still wore the soft lanyard. He still drove the truck. He still walked the building every morning before the executives arrived, because the work was the part he loved, and the ownership was only the part that let him protect it. Gerrit Voss, the regional director his wife had introduced as the real chapter, ran one of the company's leasing divisions. Desmond had seen the name on an org chart. He had no idea, until a few weeks before the party, that the man was the one Renata had chosen. He found that out the way he found out most things, because someone who'd been watching finally decided to show him. Her name was Adelaide Pryor, and she had run the building's records and contracts office for 31 years before she semi-retired into a part-time consulting role she refused to fully give up. Small, straight-backed, silver hair pinned the same way every day, reading glasses on a chain. She had taken to Desmond years ago, back when he was just the operations man who actually read every line of every report, and she had never stopped looking out for him. She called him in November. "I need you to come by," she said. "Eat something first, then I'll show you what I've kept." Walter, Desmond's attorney, patient, methodical, the kind of man who called at 7 in the morning and never put drama into bad news, had already told her it was time. Adelaide's house smelled of coffee and cedar and something faintly sweet. She set a plate in front of him and waited until he'd finished before she opened the first folder. "I keep records," she said, "the way another person might say I breathe, and about a year ago, I started seeing the same 2 names show up in places they had no business overlapping. So I started a file." She opened it. Neat pages, each dated in a careful hand. "I'll walk you through it in order." "First," she said, "your wife and Gerrit Voss have been together far longer than either of them is letting on. There are event invoices, her company billing his division for consulting on functions that never happened, or happened at 1/10 of the cost. There are building access logs showing them both badging into the same vacant floor after hours, more than a dozen times. She slid the pages across. The dates are all here. One of them is the weekend you told me you were covering a double so she could go to a conference. Desmond read the date. It matched. He filed it away. Second, she said, not pausing for his feelings because she knew he didn't want her to. The money. While you two were married, Renata's company kept billing Voss's division for work it didn't do, and Voss kept approving it. They were moving company money to her business and splitting the benefit. She wasn't just having an affair on your time, she was running a small, steady drain through the firm, and he was signing off on it. She turned a page. About $420,000 across the last year that I can document. Desmond folded his hands. And the part that makes it mine? She set down a third folder. She opened it slowly. Third, she said. Voss's division reports up through the management company. The management company sits inside the parent. I pulled the ownership chain all the way to the top, just to be certain of what I was looking at before I called you. She looked at him over her glasses. Read the controlling interest on the top line. Desmond already knew. He looked anyway. His own name. His own signature scanned into the record. He stood over all three folders and didn't touch any single one of them. He looked at all of it together, the way he stood over a building's full system schematic when something failed in the night, not reading any one line, but feeling where everything connected. The affair. The money drained through fake invoices, and the structural fact underneath it all. The man his wife was about to parade through his atrium as her future was an employee, defrauding a company that Desmond owned, with Desmond's own wife handling the paperwork. He could see the whole shape of it now. "What do you want to do?" Adelaide asked. Desmond closed the folder. "I want to do it right," he said. "And I think I want to let her pick the room." He didn't move fast. That was the part Renata had never been able to account for. She had spent 7 years deciding exactly what kind of man Desmond was. She had been wrong about the most important thing. She had mistaken patience for the absence of capability. It wasn't. Patience was his most practiced skill. It was just the one she'd never had reason to watch him use. He understood sequencing the way a man understands a building. You don't shut down a system at the breaker before you know every line it feeds. You don't pull the failed part until the replacement is staged and the people who depend on the system are protected. And you don't correct a thing built crooked until you've let it show you, in full, exactly how crooked it is. So he waited. He let the days pass. He gave Renata no reason to think he was anything but the man she'd decided he was. He didn't change how he spoke to her. He didn't follow her. His stillness was its own kind of staging. If he'd wanted fast, it could have been done before Renata ever sent the party invitations. One conversation. One memo. Voss gone by Friday, and Renata served by Monday. But fast was its own kind of mercy, and Desmond had learned something in 2 decades of buildings. The failures you fix quietly, in the dark, before anyone notices. Teach no one anything. The ones that matter are the ones the whole system gets to watch correct itself. Patience wasn't weakness. It was just a skill that didn't show on a man until the moment he chose to use it, and Renata had never once believed he had reason to use it. Meanwhile, he made quiet calls. Walter handled the divorce groundwork and, separately, the documentation of what had been drained through the firm. Della, a forensic accountant as precise as a torque wrench, pulled every invoice Renata's company had sent Voss's division and matched them against what had actually been delivered. The real event costs, the real headcounts. The catering orders that proved a gala was a dinner for 9. The fake billing lit up against the real records. The 420,000 became closer to 490 once she finished. He also brought in the company's compliance counsel, Okafor, a quiet man who read approvals until he found the exact signature where the trust had been bent. Voss's signature was on nearly all of them. Desmond read every report once. Then he folded each one in half and in half again and stacked them in order in a single accordion file. He didn't make copies he didn't need. He didn't talk. He didn't post a word. He walked his building every morning, ran his operation, and gave no one any reason to think his world had changed. And he knew the holiday party was coming. He knew the atrium, because he managed it. He knew Renata had already RSVP'd, because the planning had crossed a desk he controlled, and he knew, because Adelaide's logs made it plain, that Renata intended to bring Voss and announce him. Desmond could have stopped it a dozen ways. He didn't. He had decided to let her choose the setting herself. She chose his atrium. She chose the loudest possible room. She had no idea it was the one room in the world where he held every wire. When the party was at its fullest, Renata holding court near the bar, Voss beside her with the refilled glass in his hand. The people from her world arranged around them like an audience. The quartet finished a song. And, into that small natural quiet, Adelaide stepped to the low platform by the elevator bank, where the company's managing director had been about to give the usual holiday remarks. Except it wasn't the managing director who took the microphone. It was Walter, with a slim folder, and beside him Okafor. And behind them, unhurried, Desmond, still in the soft lanyard. No jacket changed, no transformation. Just the man they'd all walked past. "Good evening," Walter said, in a level voice that carried. "Before the formal remarks, there are a few matters of company business the principal would like acknowledged tonight, while the relevant parties are present." The room turned, expecting a toast. Okafor set the first sheet on the platform's small table and, in a quiet, factual voice, described it, a pattern of invoices billed by an outside event firm to one of the company's divisions, for services the records showed were never rendered. He named the figure. He let it sit in the air. Near the bar, Renata's smile became work to hold. He set down the second sheet, the approvals, signature after signature. These were authorized, he said, by a single divisional director. He did not say the name. He didn't have to. People had already begun, instinctively, to look toward Garrett Voss, whose grace had drained entirely out of his face. Voss started to say something about a private business matter, about handling this offline, about how this was hardly the venue. That was when Okafor placed the third sheet on the table, the ownership structure of the company, the controlling interest highlighted, and said, quietly, that he would be precise about what was and was not being said. That no criminal complaint was being filed in this room tonight, only that the documentation existed, that it had been preserved, and that the controlling owner of the company was fully aware of all of it. Someone near the front asked, half laughing, who the controlling owner even was. Okafor didn't answer. He simply turned, with the whole atrium turning after him, toward the man in the soft lanyard at the back of the platform. Renata's expression went through several things in the space of 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, then something that looked very much like the floor opening beneath her, in front of every person she'd brought there to witness her debut. She had worked all evening to keep her face arranged. The arrangement failed all at once, and it failed publicly, in the room she had chosen. The silence lasted 12 seconds. Desmond counted them, the way he counted the beat of the building's systems cycling over. Then Walter, evenly. We'll let the relevant parties speak with counsel. Enjoy your evening, everyone. Desmond stepped down from the platform. He gathered nothing. He crossed the atrium he knew better than anyone alive, past the people from his wife's world who were no longer looking at her. And he stopped just once beside her. He said it quietly, only for her, not as performance, because it was meant for her. You brought him to my house to show him off, Desmond said. You just never knew whose house it was. He turned to Voss, who had gone gray around the mouth. He didn't raise his voice for him either. You called me the maintenance guy, he said. You worked for me the whole time. He walked out of the atrium without looking back. It did not happen all at once. Gerrit Voss was removed from his role within the week. The fraudulent billing referred for civil recovery of what could be recovered. Without the title and the division, the standing he'd been so proud of collapsed in stages. The people who'd laughed at his jokes stopped returning his calls. He was not destroyed dramatically. He was simply reduced to the size of a man who'd signed his name to things that weren't his to give. Renata, named on the invoices and tied to the entity that received them, was held to her share of what had been taken. The bright new chapter she'd announced to a room full of witnesses never came. There was nothing left to build it on once the full picture assembled. The people who'd stood in a circle around her at the bar found reasons not to call. She was carrying the weight of what she had chosen, the way a person carries something they cannot set down, not dramatically, just constantly. The whole room had watched her choose it. Desmond was building something. Not fast, the way he built everything. He kept the staff who ran the building well, learned the names of the new hires, and protected the people who'd had nothing to do with any of it. There had been one young woman from the catering crew that night who, in the minutes after the room emptied, had quietly brought Desmond a chair and a glass of water without being asked, and said only that she was sorry he'd had to do that in front of everyone. He remembered it. A few months later, when the building's events office needed a coordinator, he made sure her name was the first one considered. She got the job. His name still wasn't on the lobby directory. He preferred it that way. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. He was not rich in the way Renata had imagined richness. He was solid in a way she'd never once been able to picture. 14 months later, he had the atrium's old quartet platform rebuilt into a small, permanent stage for the building's events, and he did the finish carpentry on it himself over 3 weekends. Adelaide came by when he was done and brought a small potted succulent, no card. Just the plant. He set it on the windowsill of his office, the small one off the service corridor he'd never given up. He watered it on Thursdays. On a clear evening in early spring, Desmond walked the building alone after the offices had emptied, a glass of water in his hand, and let the place settle into the dark around him. The system cycled over from day mode to evening exactly when they were supposed to. The backup lights along the mezzanine held. The building was holding, the way it always held, because he still made sure of it. He thought, for a moment, about a refilled water glass and a man who hadn't bothered to look at him. Then he stopped thinking about it, because it was no longer load-bearing in his life. He finished his water. He turned out the atrium lights himself, the way he always had, and went home. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.